A photograph arrived this week that changed the shape of this case. Not a leaked document, not a police briefing. A photograph taken by someone who was there, sent voluntarily to a volunteer organization, and now part of the most detailed independent reconstruction of that July 4th afternoon that anyone outside of law enforcement has ever assembled. In the image, multiple boats sit clustered together in a shallow cove off Horn Island, Mississippi, tied gunwale to gunwale, like a floating neighborhood. Every one of them is full of people. Every one of them is registered. And every person visible in that frame is, in the language of the courtroom, a potential witness. The question that has hovered over this case since the beginning has never been whether there were people nearby when Nolan Wells disappeared. The question has been whether those people have been found, whether they have been asked the right questions, and whether what they know has been heard. This week, we may have gotten closer to answering that. Before we go further, I want to say something plainly. This story involves a young man who lost his life, a family that is still waiting for answers, and a community that has been shaken by the silence around this case. We will handle the facts with care, name what is confirmed, and be honest about what remains unknown. This is not entertainment built on someone else's grief. It is an attempt to lay out the record as clearly as we can, because clarity is what the people closest to this deserve. Now, there are several things we need to walk through today. A new timeline report compiled from crowdsourced photographs and video, a set of images that reveal exactly how many boats and how many people were in that cove on the afternoon of July 4th. A critical gap in the story, nearly 3 hours, during which no one can say with certainty where Nolan Wells was or what was happening to him. A reported altercation that took place around 5 in the afternoon, the details of which have still not been publicly confirmed. And a grand jury, now convened, with the legal authority to compel testimony and subpoena evidence from the very people who were there that day. Let's start where this story starts, with a young man heading out onto the water on a holiday morning. Nolan Wells was a young African-American man from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. By every account offered by the people who knew him, he was sociable, well-liked, and deeply connected to his community. His best friend, Warren Hudson, would later describe him as the kind of person people gravitated toward, not loud, not seeking attention, just someone others naturally wanted to be around. He was not the kind of person anyone expected to become the center of a national conversation about what really happened on a summer afternoon in the Gulf of Mexico. On the morning of July 4th, Nolan traveled to Horn Island aboard a vessel called the Triton. He was not alone. A broader group of friends had made plans to celebrate the holiday together, but they arrived in separate boats spread across 3 to 4 different vessels. That detail, seemingly minor at first, would later become one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Because, from the very beginning, the question of who was responsible for making sure Nolan got home was far less clear than it initially appeared. Horn Island is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, remote, uninhabited, accessible only by boat. There are no permanent structures on the island, no reliable cell service. No way on or off except across open water. It is a place people from that part of the country grow up, looking forward to Barrier Island cookouts, fireworks watched from the deck of a boat, the particular freedom of a summer day spent where the land runs out and the Gulf begins. It is a beautiful place. It is also a dangerous one. And here is something that matters more than most people realize until it is too late. Horn Island has a particularly aggressive underwater slope near the shoreline. Investigators and witnesses have both noted this. A person can go from standing in knee-deep water to being completely submerged in just a few steps. Currents move through that area. Riptides are a documented hazard. And on this particular day, the water was full of people who had been drinking for hours. Think about what that means, not as a judgment, as a physical reality. You are standing in waist-deep water, a drink in your hand, the sun on your back, music coming off the boats. You take 2 steps and the bottom drops away. The current shifts. Your feet leave the sand, and now you are not wading anymore. You are swimming, or you are trying to. By early afternoon, the cove near Horn Island looked like a floating village. Boats were anchored side by side, some tied together, with people moving between them freely. Dozens of people were in the water and on the boats socializing, laughing, holding drinks in water that, in photographs taken that day, comes up to some people's armpits and, in certain cases, close to their necks. This week, new photographs emerged, and what they show is significant. Caitlin Becker, senior national correspondent for the New York Post, was among the first to walk through what the images reveal.
Well, what we're seeing here comes from this new report from the United Cajun Navy, and you're seeing several boats strung together. This is one of the first images that we've seen of this certain configuration of boats there. They're all identified, one of which was the boat that Nolan came out there on. There's what you're seeing here is, as you said, a potential pool of witnesses.
The implications of that photograph were not lost on anyone reviewing the evidence. Every boat visible, every one of them full of people, and every person on them a person who may have seen something.
Hey, Caitlin, look at this. There's boat number 1, there's boat X, there's boat number 2, there's boat number 3, and there's a boat from which the photo is taken. Now, look in the water. There much has been made. Nolan Wells was drinking. Okay, well, apparently everybody was. They all have containers, open containers in the water. Okay, as far as I know, that's not a felony. Boat number 1, full of people. Boat X, full of people. Boat number 2, full of people. Boat number 3, full of people. People on the boat from which the photo was taken. Some of these boats tied together. You know what that means in my world, Caitlin Becker, joining us in the New York Post? That means witnesses. See, when I look at that, I see witnesses. Other people say, hey, there's people having a good time. I see witnesses. Do you see all those people?
And a
Caitlin?
lot of them.
Who were they? Have they been spoken to? Have they been polygraphed? What can they tell me?
That is the right question. Not what were these people doing, but what did they see? And more importantly, have they been asked? According to reporting, dozens of people have spoken to law enforcement as witnesses, but whether any of them were the specific individuals visible in this cove photograph, the people closest to the water, closest to the boats, closest to wherever Nolan was during those final hours remains unclear. The timing of the images is also significant. They appear to have been taken around 3:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon, around the time the Triton, the boat Nolan arrived on, began taking on water and ultimately departed. What we do not know is exactly where Nolan was when these photographs were taken. Now, to understand how these photographs came to light, you have to understand the role of the United Cajun Navy in this case. The United Cajun Navy is a volunteer search, rescue, and disaster response organization with deep roots in Gulf Coast communities. They mobilized quickly after Nolan's disappearance, using boats and aerial assets to systematically search the area. It was during one of those aerial searches that Nolan Wells's body was located washed up on Horn Island. He had been found. But the answers were still missing. Into the silence left by officials, the Cajun Navy did something remarkable. They issued a public call asking anyone who had been at Horn Island on July 4th to submit whatever they had: photos, videos, first-hand information. The response was substantial, and what they did with that material matters. Brian Trasher, Vice President of the United Cajun Navy, explained it clearly.
First of all, I want to thank you for calling this report what it is, and that's a timeline. And some people have called it an investigative report, and that's not accurate because, as you know, we're not investigators. And what we did, Nancy, was we asked our followers, say, hey, if anybody was there that day, you have pictures, videos, whatever, send it to us just so we can go through it, see if there's anything relevant. We took all that information and compiled it into a just one digestible report of things we thought were relevant and could be helpful. Maybe they're not. Maybe law enforcement's already seen all this and it's nothing new to them. But we just wanted to be transparent about what we received. So going back to your question, the pictures that we received, we did not, as an organization, take any of these photographs. These are all images that we received from people who were trying to help us out and trying to help Nolan's family out.
That distinction matters. The Cajun Navy is not a law enforcement agency. They are not investigators. What they produced is a timeline, not an investigative report. They compiled what they received, they were transparent about what they could and could not verify, and they shared it. And the people attacking the United Cajun Navy for doing it, the people who have contributed nothing except criticism from the safety of their keyboards, would do well to consider what this case would look like without them. They searched for Nolan when others did not. They found him when others could not. And now they have assembled a body of evidence that may help answer the questions his family has been asking since July. One of the challenges with the photographs is establishing exactly when they were taken. Timestamps on images can reflect the time a screenshot was captured, not the time the original photo was shot. The Cajun Navy was careful about this. But they found other ways to narrow the window, and what they observed in the process raised its own concerns.
All we don't know definitively times on all these because even though they're time stamped, it could be a time when it was screenshotted, stamped, not necessarily the original photograph. So we were very careful to denote that in our report that we can't verify timelines, although based on shadows and positions and things like that, we can determine that some of these, as noted, are taken in the late afternoon. One of the things I thought was interesting about some of these photos we got, Nancy, was that a lot of the photos we had seen before were people like in waist deep water. Well, some of the photos we provided show people up, water up to their chest, almost to their neck, and that's not really wading. That's treading water, in my opinion, and that I thought might have been significant to know that many people were, perhaps enjoying some libations, but also in water that might have been a little too deep just to be playing in.
That observation that people were not merely wading but functionally treading water while drinking is not a minor point. It speaks directly to the conditions Nolan was in during his final confirmed hours on that island. And Brian Trasher went further, explaining exactly why the depth of the water near Horn Island is so deceptive.
The photo at the top, yeah, you're right. It's about up to their armpit. I think there was one later in the report that that showed some of the kids. This was a screenshot of a social media post, and there's 3 boats visible, one fourth boat further in the distance, but a lot of kids on one boat. I say kids, young people on one boat, some on the boat, some in the water. And some of them, it looks, maybe up to the armpit, but some of them, depending on their own height, it looks like it's, I could see a girl holding something in her hand and the water looks to be pretty close to her neck. So that's pretty far out. Now, we've said several times that Horn Island has a very aggressive slope. So you can be in shallow water and deep water within just a few steps. And once you get into that deep water, you're not as able to keep your feet on the ground if a current comes and pulls you, or God forbid a riptide comes and drags you. So that's why we thought it was significant to know that they were socializing in fairly deep water.
Layer that onto the rest of the picture. A young man without a phone, without a ride home, on an island where the bottom drops away without warning, surrounded by people who had been drinking for hours, in water that reaches their necks. That is not a party detail, that is a survival condition. Now let us talk about what those boats can tell us. Every vessel in those photographs is registered a number on its hull, like a tail number on a plane. Every number leads to an owner, and every owner can confirm who was aboard that day. Brian Trasher confirmed that the Cajun Navy has been comparing notes with the sheriff's office and that many people have already come forward on their own.
You can make out the registration number or the name of the boat if the vessel's name is registered, along with the registration number. Usually that's sometimes only on a Coast Guard document, but sometimes on a state registration you do put the vehicle, the boat name if it's asked for, or if you have one. So that is all possible. I'm told, and we're asked to compare notes with the sheriff's office, which we're doing. But I was told that there's been a lot of people that have been contacted and interviewed, and there's a lot of people who were there that day that voluntarily came forward to tell what they know, and because they might have seen their boats and pictures, said, "Oh, we might want to go ahead and call them, and let them know, where we were, who was with us, and what we know." So I commend those people for coming forward because it's not always easy.
He is right. Coming forward in a case like this when the internet is watching, when strangers are being harassed for the crime of having been nearby, takes a kind of courage that deserves respect, not suspicion. But there are others who have not come forward, and the question of what they know remains open. At some point during the afternoon, Nolan began talking to a young woman. For weeks after his disappearance, she was referred to publicly only as Katie. She was described initially by the people on Nolan's boat as a stranger, someone Nolan had simply met for the first time that day. That characterization would not hold. Later reporting revealed that at least one member of the group aboard the Triton had been communicating with Katie by text message and was aware of who she was before the search for Nolan even began. Why the initial characterization painted her as a stranger, when at least one person clearly knew otherwise, has never been satisfactorily explained. Let me be precise about what I am saying and what I am not. I am not suggesting that this discrepancy proves anything sinister. People under stress misremember. People simplify. People, when they are scared, sometimes say less than they know because they are not sure what matters. But when an investigation hinges on who was with whom and when, and a key detail about a key person turns out to have been inaccurate from the start. That is a gap that needs to be accounted for, not because it points to guilt, but because it points to an incomplete record. Now, here is where the accounts begin to diverge, and diverge significantly. Sometime between 3 and 4:30 in the afternoon, the Triton, the vessel Nolan had arrived on, began taking on water. A maritime towing service call was placed. The call was later canceled, reportedly because a local man named Bart Edmondson agreed to tow the vessel back to shore as an act of goodwill. It is worth pausing here to note something about Edmondson. He was a complete stranger to the drama unfolding around him. He saw a boat in trouble and offered to help. For that, he would later become a target of online harassment. That fact says something important about the climate. This case has created a climate in which anyone whose name surfaces, for any reason, risks being treated as a suspect by people who have no evidence and no authority to make that judgment. We will not participate in that here. According to the people aboard the Triton, they departed Horn Island at approximately 4:31 in the afternoon. Their GPS data supports that departure time. Before leaving, they say they urged Nolan to board the vessel. He refused. His reasoning, according to their account, was that he intended to stay behind and continue his conversation with Katie. His phone was left on the Triton when it pulled away. That single fact deserves its own silence. The moment the Triton left, Nolan Wells had no means of communication, no way to call for help, no confirmed arrangement for how he was going to get back to the mainland. He was on an uninhabited barrier island, 10 miles offshore, with no cell service and no ride home. Whatever happened next, he faced it without any way to reach the people who cared about him. Katie's account, provided through a statement made publicly by her sister on social media, tells a different story from the one offered by the Triton's occupants. According to that account, Katie had a conversation with Nolan, assumed he was heading back to the boat he arrived on, heard his friends urging him to get on, and believed they would not have left without him. Katie reportedly made it back to the mainland herself on a separate vessel. Each side, in effect, places Nolan in the care of the other at the moment of departure, and in the space between those two accounts, Nolan Wells disappears. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to read those two accounts and conclude that someone must be lying. But the truth is more uncomfortable than that. It is entirely possible that no one is lying, and that what happened was a failure of assumption, each party believing the other had it covered, and neither one confirming. That is not a crime. It may be a tragedy born of carelessness, or of too many drinks, or of the ordinary human tendency to assume someone else will handle it. But it is also possible that the full story has not yet been told. And that is what the investigation and now the grand jury exists to determine. One photograph in particular stands out among the material the Cajun Navy compiled. Included on page 14 of their report, it shows a young man matching Nolan's description on the beach at approximately 4:50 in the afternoon after the Triton's GPS data confirms the vessel had already departed. That photograph could not be definitively confirmed or ruled out as depicting Nolan, but its significance is clear. If it is him, it proves he was alive and on the island after the boat carrying his friends had already left. It narrows the window, it changes the geometry of the timeline, and it raises the stakes for every other piece of evidence collected from that afternoon. What we know about the hours that followed is disturbingly thin. A witness has stated that by 7:30 that evening, Nolan was nowhere to be found. Not on the beach, not visible in the water, not on any of the boats, still in the area. That is a gap of nearly 3 hours between the Triton's departure and this last observational data point, 3 hours with almost no verified information about where Nolan was or what he was doing. 3 hours on an island with no structures, no lights after dark, and water on every side. Reports also indicate that around 5 o'clock that afternoon, roughly 30 minutes after the Triton left, a group of people were observed in an altercation in the vicinity. Who those individuals were, what the dispute was about, and whether Nolan was anywhere near it has not been publicly confirmed. I will not speculate about what that altercation involved, because speculation without evidence is how innocent people get accused and how real leads get buried under noise. But the existence of a reported confrontation, occurring within the window during which Nolan was unaccounted for, is a fact that belongs in the record. Warren Hudson spent that night trying to reach his best friend. He contacted at least one of the Triton's occupants, who told him the last he knew, Nolan was with that girl. The suggestion was that Nolan had probably just gone off somewhere and would turn up. It took too much time, by Warren's account, before the alarm became official. a missing persons report was eventually filed. Search efforts were launched across the waters surrounding Horn Island and the broader Gulf Islands area. An autopsy was conducted following the discovery of Nolan's body. As of the time of this reporting, the results of that autopsy have not been made public. Toxicology results have similarly not been released. Law enforcement has not publicly stated what the cause or manner of death was determined to be. The investigation has proceeded largely without any official transparency toward the family or the public. The autopsy is complete. It is being kept from the people who need it most. And whatever it reveals trauma to the body, evidence of what happened in those final hours remains locked behind a wall of institutional silence. There is one more thing to address before we turn to where this case stands officially, and it concerns a claim that has circulated widely, the suggestion that Nolan simply hit his head. Marie Pereira, a criminal defense attorney and certified domestic violence expert, had something to say about that.
It is hard to believe, and that's why it's extremely important that the law enforcement are not too proud to get help from the public. Like you said, if people are sending in videos, they should be using those videos to conduct further investigation. I'm praying that this is a situation like Brian Koberger, where the police department, they were being ragged and being called ranky-dink police, while all the time they were investigating and putting together a case against him. I hope that yeah, because all the time they were saying, oh, what did they do? Long big beard, which wasn't very conducive to believing he knew what he was doing, but they knew what they were doing.
That comparison to the Brian Koberger case, where a police department that looked slow and disorganized turned out to have been quietly building a meticulous case, is worth sitting with. It is the best case scenario. That, behind the silence, behind the unreleased autopsy, behind the lack of public updates, there is a team of investigators who know exactly what they are doing and are choosing not to show their hand until they are ready. Maybe that is what is happening here. But hope is not a strategy, and a family's right to know how their son died should not depend on hope. Here is where this case stands as of now. A grand jury has reportedly been convened in connection with this case. For those unfamiliar with the term, a grand jury is a legal body empowered to investigate potential criminal conduct. It operates in secret. It can issue subpoenas compelling witnesses to appear and testify under oath. It can compel the production of documents, photographs, phone records, and other evidence. Its purpose is not to determine guilt or innocence. That is the role of a trial jury. A grand jury's role is to determine whether there is probable cause to believe a crime was committed and, if so, to issue an indictment. The convening of a grand jury means that prosecutors have determined there is a basis for using the legal system's most powerful compulsory tools to pursue the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells. That is not a minor development. It means that the people who were on those boats, every one of them, can be called to testify. Not asked, called, under oath, with legal consequences for refusing or for lying. It means that phone records, GPS logs, text messages, and social media data can be subpoenaed and examined. It means that the wall of silence, voluntary or otherwise, that has surrounded parts of this case may not hold much longer. The autopsy results remain unreleased. The toxicology results remain unreleased. Law enforcement has not publicly identified a cause or manner of death. The family of Nolan Wells has still not received a clear public accounting of how their son died. A community that mobilized to search for a missing young man found his body on the same island where he spent his last confirmed hours alive. And a cast of witnesses, dozens of them, spread across multiple boats, some of whom have come forward voluntarily, and others who may know more than they have shared, remain scattered across the Gulf Coast, carrying whatever they saw, heard, or did on that July afternoon. The questions that remain are not small ones. What does the autopsy reveal about how Nolan died? Was there trauma to the body? Was there something that happened that the public record does not yet reflect? What occurred during the 3-hour window between the Triton's departure and the last confirmed sighting? What was the altercation at 5 o'clock about, and who was involved? Why were there inconsistencies in what the boat occupants said about their knowledge of Katie? And what will the grand jury uncover that public investigation has not yet reached? Horn Island is still out there, 10 miles off the coast, quiet, indifferent to the questions being asked about what happened on its shores. The water that surrounds it does not keep secrets forever. Neither do people. The truth, whatever it is, has not finished revealing itself. At the center of all of this is a family, a mother, a father, people who loved Nolan Wells and who sent him off on a July morning, expecting him to come home. They are still waiting, not for theories, not for speculation, not for the noise of strangers on the internet who have turned their son's death into content. They are waiting for the truth verified, confirmed, and delivered by the people who have the authority and the obligation to provide it. If you were at Horn Island on July 4th and you have not yet spoken to law enforcement, the tip line maintained for the Nolan Wells investigation is publicly listed and active. What you saw may matter more than you think. And if you have been following this case, if Nolan's story has stayed with you the way it has stayed with so many, I would ask you this. What would it take for you to be satisfied that the truth has been found? Not a narrative that confirms what you already believe. The actual truth, whatever it turns out to be. Hold that standard. It is the one Nolan's family deserves. This case is far from over. We will be here as new developments emerge. If this video gave you something to think about, take a moment to give it a like. It helps more people find this story and keeps the conversation going. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the cases that matter most. For Nolan Wells,